She sat alone in the upscale restaurant, untouched glass of water before her. Her blind date never came. No text, no explanation. At the next table, a black man in his 30s waited in the same silence, deep brown skin catching the low-light, worn jacket draped over his chair, phone face down like he was used to no one calling. His close-cropped curls were still faintly flattened from a work cap, a quiet detail that didn't match the restaurant's polished shine. Then he leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to break something fragile between them. Your blind date didn't show up either. One small question. Could it be enough to reach two lonely lives? Audrey Collins had learned to measure everything. Risk, return, time. Even silence had a value she could calculate, especially when it cost her nothing to walk away. Tonight, the silence was expensive. It had cost her 3 hours of preparation, a reservation at a restaurant she would never have chosen herself, and the humiliation of sitting alone while the waitstaff pretended not to notice. The glass of water in front of her had gone from cold to room temperature. She had not touched it. She had trained herself not to fidget, not to check her phone compulsively, not to show weakness in public spaces where someone might recognize her. No one had recognized her tonight. That was the point. She had worn simple clothes, minimal jewelry, and pulled her hair back in a way that made her look softer than she felt. The reservation was under a different name. The dating app profile had used her middle name only. For once, she wanted to be seen as a woman, not a balance sheet. But the man who was supposed to meet her had not bothered to show up, and now she was paying the price of her own experiment in vulnerability. She should have left 30 minutes ago. That would have been the smart move. Cut losses, preserve dignity, move on. But something kept her in the chair, some stubborn refusal to admit that even a carefully controlled evening could spiral into failure. She had built an empire on knowing when to fold, and yet here she sat, watching the door like it owed her an explanation. At the table beside hers, the black man sat with the same stillness. She had noticed him when she first arrived, though she had not meant to. He was not the kind of man who demanded attention. His jacket was worn at the elbows, draped over the back of his chair, in a way that suggested he had learned to make himself small in public spaces. He looked just slightly out of place in a room full of polished suits and curated laughter, like a black single dad who had stepped into a world that had not really been built with him in mind and decided to sit anyway. His phone lay face down on the table. He had ordered water just like her, and he had not touched it either. Audrey did not look at him directly, but she was aware of him the way you become aware of another person in an empty waiting room. They were both waiting for something that was not coming. The difference was that he seemed resigned to it, while she was still calculating how much longer she could justify staying before it became pathetic. The man shifted in his seat. Audrey kept her eyes on the door, but she could feel him turning slightly toward her. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that it felt like a secret. Your blind date didn't show up either. Audrey's first instinct was to shut it down. She had perfected the art of the polite dismissal, the kind of response that closed a conversation before it could begin. But something in his voice stopped her. He was not hitting on her. He was not trying to rescue her or insert himself into her evening. He was simply naming the thing that both of them were sitting in, the shared absurdity of being stood up in the same restaurant at the same time. She turned her head just slightly and met his eyes. They were tired, not in the way that suggested he had been working late or sleeping poorly, but in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. No, Audrey said. The word came out sharper than she intended, so she softened it with a small, reluctant smile. Apparently not. The man nodded, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. He did not offer sympathy or try to fill the silence with platitudes. He just looked at her for a moment, then looked away, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. First time, he asked, his voice still quiet, like he was trying not to disturb the air between them. Audrey considered lying. She was good at lying when it served a purpose. But the truth felt safer in this moment with a stranger who had no reason to judge her and no way to use it against her. Yes, she admitted. You? The man let out a short breath, something that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "First time in a long time," he said. He picked up his glass of water, looked at it, then set it back down without drinking. "I wasn't even sure I wanted to come, but my neighbor offered to watch my son, and I thought, why not? Worst case, I'd sit here for an hour and go home." Turns out that's exactly what happened. Audrey felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the armor she had spent years building. He had a son. That detail should not have mattered, but it did. It made him real in a way that most people were not. Most people she met wanted something from her, even if they did not know who she was. But this man, a black single dad whose life clearly did not revolve around her, had a responsibility that was bigger than a failed date. And somehow that made him safer. "How old?" Audrey asked, surprising herself with the question. "7," the man said, and his face changed when he said it. The tiredness did not leave, but something else appeared underneath it. Something warm and unmistakable. He wanted me to bring him back dessert. I told him I'd try, but I don't think they let you order takeout when you've been sitting here alone for 45 minutes. Audrey found herself almost smiling. "They might make an exception," she said. "Pity policy." The man glanced at her, and this time there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Is that what we're operating under now?" "Pity?" "Mutual pity," Audrey corrected. "It's less pathetic that way." He did laugh then, quietly, and Audrey felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. She was not good at this small talk, casual conversation, the kind of lightness that other people seemed to carry effortlessly. But with him, it did not feel like performance. It felt like two people acknowledging the same uncomfortable truth and finding it slightly less uncomfortable together. The man extended his hand across the small space between their tables. "Darius," he said. Audrey looked at his hand, deep brown and calloused, the kind of hand that worked with tools or spent time outdoors. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. The handshake of someone who had learned to be careful with his strength. "Audrey," she said. She did not offer her last name. He did not ask for it. Darius withdrew his hand and settled back into his chair. He did not try to move closer or suggest they combine tables. He seemed to understand that whatever this was, it existed in the space between them, and moving it would break it. "So," Darius said, his voice still carrying that same quiet tone, "what do we do now? Do we keep waiting, or do we admit defeat and go home?" Audrey considered the question. She could leave. She should leave. There was work waiting for her at home, emails that needed responses, reports that needed reviewing. She had built her entire life around the idea that time was a resource that could not be wasted. And yet, sitting here with this stranger who asked nothing of her, who did not even know who she was, felt like the first thing she had done in months that was not a waste. "I don't know," Audrey said honestly. "I've never been in this situation before." Darius nodded slowly. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I'm thinking if we're both already here and we've both already been stood up, maybe we just talk for a little while. Not a date. Just two people who got unlucky at the same time." Audrey felt the weight of the decision pressing on her. She had spent so long building walls, learning to control every variable, to never let anyone close enough to see the parts of her that were not polished and powerful. But Darius was not asking to see those parts. He was not asking for anything except a conversation. And maybe that was exactly what made it so dangerous. "Okay," Audrey said, the words slipping out before she could second guess herself. "But no last names, no job titles, no talk about what we do or where we live. Just this." Darius studied her for a moment, and she could see him processing the boundaries she was setting. Most men would have pushed back, would have tried to charm their way past the rules. But Darius just nodded. "Just this," he agreed. "Deal." Audrey felt something strange and unfamiliar settle in her chest. It was not quite relief, not quite anticipation. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something unknown and choosing to step forward anyway, even though every instinct told her to retreat. Darius signaled to the waiter, who approached with the careful neutrality of someone who had seen too many awkward dates to be surprised by anything. Darius ordered coffee. Audrey ordered the same, though she rarely drank it this late. It felt important to match him, to equalize the dynamic, to make it clear that this was not him rescuing her, or her condescending to his company. When the waiter left, Darius leaned back in his chair and looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. And it was not curiosity exactly. It was more like recognition, as if he saw something in her that he understood without needing an explanation. "You look like you were about to leave," Darius said, "when I first spoke to you, like you were calculating the exact right moment to go." Audrey felt exposed in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly thrilling. "I was," she admitted. "I don't like being somewhere I'm not supposed to be." Darius tilted his head slightly. "And where are you supposed to be?" Audrey opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. The question was simple, but the answer was not. Where was she supposed to be? In her office, closing deals and managing portfolios? In her empty apartment, eating takeout alone while reviewing quarterly reports? In rooms full of people who only spoke to her because of what she could give them? "I don't know," Audrey said quietly. "I used to know, but lately I'm not sure anymore." Darius did not respond right away. He just looked at her. And in that look, Audrey felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, not as someone with power or influence or connections. Just as a person who was tired and uncertain and sitting in a restaurant because she had hoped for one night that something might be different. "Me too," Darius said finally, and the simplicity of those two words made Audrey's throat tighten. The coffee arrived and they both wrapped their hands around the warm cups, letting the moment stretch between them. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the small, fragile thing beginning to take shape at two tables pushed just slightly too close together. The coffee had gone cold between them, but neither had suggested ordering more. Audrey found herself studying Darius in the gaps between sentences, noticing things she would not normally pay attention to. The way he turned his cup in slow circles on the table, the slight furrow between his eyebrows when he was thinking, the fact that he did not try to fill every silence with words. She was not used to silences that felt comfortable. In her world, silence was a weapon, a negotiating tactic, a way to make the other person crack first. But Darius did not seem to be playing that game. When he went quiet, it was because he was listening, or because he had said what he needed to say and did not feel the need to embellish it. "Can I ask you something?" Darius said, breaking the quiet that had settled between them. Audrey tensed slightly, her instinct to protect herself kicking in. "Depends on the question." Darius considered this, then nodded as if accepting the terms. "Why did you agree to a blind date in the first place? You don't seem like someone who does things without a reason." Audrey felt the question land somewhere deeper than she wanted it to. She took a breath, weighing how much truth she could afford to give away. The rules she had set still held. No job titles, no real identities. But the question was not about what she did. It was about why she was here. And that felt harder to deflect. "I wanted to see if I could," Audrey said finally. "If I could just be someone sitting across from another person without all the other things in the way." Darius watched her carefully. What other things? Audrey looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the table. They were hands that signed contracts worth millions. Hands that had built something most people would never achieve. But tonight, they were just hands, and she was just a woman who had been stood up. "Expectations," Audrey said quietly. "People expect things from me. They see what I can give them before they see me. I thought maybe just once I could meet someone who didn't know anything about me and wouldn't want anything either." Darius absorbed this without comment. He did not offer empty reassurances or tell her that she was being too cynical. He just sat with it, and somehow that made it easier to have said it out loud. "I get that," Darius said after a moment. "Not in the same way, maybe, but I know what it's like to feel like people only see one part of you." Audrey looked up, meeting his eyes. "What part do they see?" Darius shifted in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "The dad part," he said. "That's the thing people know first. I'm Jalen's dad. I'm the guy at the school pickup. I'm the one who leaves work early to make it to soccer practice, sometimes the only black dad in a line of SUVs. And that's fine. I love being his dad, but sometimes I forget there used to be other parts of me too." Audrey felt something twist in her chest. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. She had spent so many years building her career, pouring everything into becoming someone who mattered in the world, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to matter in a smaller, quieter way. "How long has it been since his mother?" Audrey asked. Darius looked surprised by the question, but not unfartable. 3 years, he said. She left when Jalen was 4, decided motherhood wasn't what she thought it would be. "I don't blame her for leaving. I just wish she'd figured it out before we had a kid together." Audrey heard the careful neutrality in his voice, the way he was trying not to sound bitter, even though he had every right to be. She respected that. It would have been easy to vilify someone who walked away, but Darius seemed to understand that people were more complicated than that. "That must have been hard," Audrey said, and she meant it. Darius shrugged, but the gesture was heavy. "It was, still is some days, but Jalen's good. He's happy. And I'm getting better at being both people for him, the fun parent and the responsible one." Audrey watched him as he spoke about his son, the way his whole posture changed. The tiredness was still there, but so was something else, something solid and unshakable. Darius was a man who had built his life around someone other than himself, and there was a kind of strength in that she had never understood before. For a moment, she pictured a framed photo on a worn-out wall somewhere, a black family squeezed together on a thrift store couch, all bright eyes and crooked smiles, the kind of love that didn't care about perfection. "Do you ever resent it?" Audrey asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it, having to be everything for him. Darius looked at her, really looked at her, and Audrey realized she had revealed more than she intended. The question was not just about him. It was about her, about the life she had chosen, about whether giving everything to one thing meant losing everything else. "Sometimes," Darius admitted. "Not often, but yeah, sometimes I wake up and I don't remember who I was before I became someone's entire world. And then I feel guilty for even thinking that because he didn't ask for any of this. He just deserves a parent who shows up." Audrey felt a lump forming in her throat. She had spent so long convincing herself that she had made the right choice, that success and independence were worth the loneliness. But sitting here with Darius, listening to him talk about the weight of being needed, she wondered if she had just been afraid of exactly that, of being someone's entire world and failing them. "I don't have kids," Audrey said, and the words came out more hollow than she intended. "I thought about it years ago, but the timing was never right. And then I got busy, and the years kept passing, and now I'm not sure if I even want that anymore, or if I just convinced myself I don't because it's easier." Darius did not try to fix it or tell her it was not too late. He just nodded as if he understood that some admissions did not need solutions. They sat in that shared understanding for a while, the noise of the restaurant fading into background static. Audrey realized she had not checked her phone once since they started talking. That was unusual for her. She was the kind of person who kept one eye on her notifications even during important meetings, always ready to pivot if something more urgent came up. But tonight, nothing felt more urgent than this. "Can I tell you something?" Audrey said, the words coming out before she could think better of them. Darius looked at her with that same steady attention he had given her all evening. "Yeah." Audrey took a breath. "I eat dinner alone almost every night, in my apartment at my desk with my laptop open and my phone within reach. I tell myself it's because I'm busy, because there's always work to do. But the truth is, I don't know how to do it any other way anymore. I don't know how to sit across from someone and just talk without an agenda." The confession hung in the air between them. Audrey waited for the judgment, the pity, the awkward platitude that would make her regret saying it, but Darius did not give her any of those things. "You're doing it now," Darius said simply. Audrey blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Darius gestured to the space between them, to the cold coffee and the two tables that felt closer than they had an hour ago. "You're sitting across from someone. You're talking. No agenda, just this." Audrey felt something crack open inside her, something she had been holding closed for so long she had forgotten it was there. He was right. She was doing it, and it did not feel like failure. It felt like relief. "I guess I am," Audrey said softly. Darius smiled, and it was the kind of smile that did not demand anything in return. "See, not so hard." Audrey found herself smiling back, a real smile that reached her eyes, harder than you'd think. They fell into another silence, but this one felt different. It was not the silence of two people waiting for something to happen. It was the silence of two people who had found a small, unexpected corner of comfort and were trying to figure out how long they could stay in it. Darius glanced at his phone, which was still face down on the table, then looked away. Audrey noticed the gesture. He was aware of time passing, aware that he had somewhere else to be, but he was not rushing to leave. That said something she could not quite name. "Your neighbor?" Audrey said, thinking of the detail he had mentioned earlier. "Do you do this a lot? Ask them to watch Jalen?" Darius shook his head. "Not really. She offered tonight because she knew I hadn't been out in a while. I think she felt sorry for me." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "Should she?" Darius laughed, a quiet sound that was almost self-deprecating. "Maybe I'm not exactly living the dream, but I'm doing okay. Jalen's doing okay. That's enough most days." Audrey heard the unspoken part of that sentence. Most days, but not all of them. Most days it was enough to be a good father and a decent person and to keep the bills paid. But some days he wanted more. He wanted to be seen as something other than a caretaker. He wanted to remember what it felt like to be desired, to be interesting, to be someone worth showing up for. She understood that too, more than she wanted to admit. "Why tonight?" Audrey asked. "Why did you finally say yes to a blind date?" Darius looked at her, and for the first time all evening, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Because Jalen asked me if I was lonely." He said, out of nowhere, just looked up at me and asked, and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him no, that I was fine, that we were fine together, but I couldn't lie to him. Audrey felt her chest tighten. "What did you tell him?" Darius looked down at his hands, his dark brown fingers laced together on the table. "I told him that sometimes grown-ups get lonely too, but that doesn't mean anything is wrong. And then he said I should go on a date because that's what people do when they're lonely. He's 7. He shouldn't have to worry about me like that." Audrey felt the weight of that admission settle over her. Darius had come here tonight not because he was looking for love or connection, but because his son had noticed something was missing, and he did not want to be the kind of father who taught his child that loneliness was normal. "That's why I'm here too," Audrey said quietly. "Not because of a child, but because I realized I'd stopped trying. I'd convinced myself that being alone was the same as being independent. And then one day I looked around and realized I didn't have anyone to call when something good happened or when something bad happened. I just had work." Darius met her eyes, and in that moment something shifted between them. They were not just two strangers sharing a table anymore. They were two people who had arrived at the same place, from completely different directions, both carrying the same quiet, stubborn hope that maybe there was another way to live. "Do you think it's too late?" Audrey asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. To learn how to do this, to let people in? Darius considered the question seriously, as if it mattered to him as much as it did to her. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think if we're asking the question, that means we're not done trying yet." Audrey felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. She did not cry in public. She did not cry in front of strangers, but Darius was not quite a stranger anymore, and the kindness in his voice was harder to defend against than she had expected. "I'm glad you were here tonight," Audrey said, the words coming out rough, "even if neither of us were supposed to be." Darius reached across the space between their tables, not to touch her, but just to close the distance a little. "Me too," he said, and then his phone buzzed. Face up now, and they both saw the screen light up with a call. Darius looked at it, and Audrey saw the shift in his expression, the way he went from present to divided in the space of a second. "It's my neighbor," Darius said, his voice tight. "I should take this." Audrey nodded, already pulling back, already feeling the walls starting to rebuild themselves. Darius answered the call, his voice low and concerned. and Audrey watched as he listened to whatever was being said on the other end. His face changed, worry creasing his forehead. When he hung up, he looked at her with something that might have been regret. "Jalen woke up," Darius said. "He's asking for me. I need to go." Audrey felt the evening collapsing around her, the fragile thing they had built together suddenly exposed to the cold reality of the world outside this restaurant. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You should go." Darius stood, reaching for his worn jacket and pulling it on with quick, practiced movements. But he did not leave immediately. He stood there looking at her like he was trying to memorize something he was afraid he would forget. "I didn't want this to end like this," Darius said. Audrey forced a small smile. "Nothing lasts," she said, and the words came out more bitter than she intended. Darius looked at her for a long moment, and Audrey could see him wrestling with something. Then he pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and held it out to her. "I don't know if this breaks your rules," Darius said, "but I'd like to see you again if you want." Audrey stared at the phone, at the contact screen, waiting for her to type in her number. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect herself, to end this before it became something that could hurt her. But then she thought about going home to her empty apartment, to her laptop and her cold dinners, and her life that was so carefully controlled it had stopped feeling like a life at all. She took the phone and typed in her number. No last name, just Audrey. Darius took the phone back and looked at the screen, then looked at her. "I'll text you," he said. "So you have mine too." Audrey nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Darius hesitated one more time, then turned and walked toward the door. Audrey watched him go, watched the way he moved through the restaurant like someone who had learned to carry weight without complaint, the unhurried stride of a black man who knew eyes might be on him and chose to move gently through the space anyway. And then he was gone, and she was alone again, sitting in front of a glass of water she had never touched. Her phone buzzed a moment later. She looked down and saw a text from an unknown number. "It was nice to meet you, Audrey. Take care of yourself." Her phone buzzed again as she reached the corner. She pulled it out, expecting work, expecting some crisis that needed her attention. But it was Darius. "I hope you got home safe. Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you probably realize." Audrey stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She had no idea what to say. Thank you felt inadequate. She wanted to tell him that she had not known it was possible to feel this way, to sit with someone and be seen without being dissected. She wanted to tell him that she was terrified of what came next, of the possibility that this fragile connection would shatter the moment real life intruded. But those were not things you said in a text message to someone you had just met. "I'm home." Tonight was unexpected, in a good way. She sent it before she could overthink it, then immediately regretted how careful it sounded, how controlled. But Darius did not seem to mind. Unexpected is good. I could use more of that. Audrey found herself smiling at the screen, a small, involuntary smile that felt foreign on her face. She typed back quickly, "How's Jalen?" The response came a moment later, already back asleep. "He had a bad dream. Sometimes he just needs to know I'm here." Audrey felt her throat tighten, reading that Darius had left not because he wanted to, but because his son needed him, and he had not hesitated. That kind of certainty, that immediate prioritization of someone else's needs, was something Audrey had never experienced. She had spent her whole life making decisions based on what would advance her career, protect her position, maximize her returns. The idea of dropping everything for another person, of being needed in that absolute way, felt both terrifying and deeply, achingly lonely. "You're a good father," Audrey typed. "He's lucky to have you." Darius did not respond right away, and Audrey wondered if she had said too much, crossed some invisible line. But then her phone buzzed again. "I don't always feel like a good father, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, right? Just keep trying." Audrey stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around her like water around a stone, and felt something inside her shift. Darius was not perfect. He was not pretending to have it all figured out. He was just a man doing his best with what he had. And somehow that honesty was more compelling than any polished success story she had ever encountered. She wanted to see him again. The realization hit her with unexpected force. She wanted to sit across from him and hear more about his life, about Jalen, about the parts of himself he had forgotten while being someone's entire world. She wanted to tell him things she had never told anyone, things that would make her vulnerable in ways her board of directors would never understand. But she also knew that wanting something and being able to have it were two very different things. "Can I ask you something?" Audrey typed, her heart beating faster. The response was almost immediate, always. Audrey took a breath, then typed the question that had been building in her chest since he walked out of the restaurant. "Do you think people like us can actually do this? Build something real when our lives are so different?" She sent it before she could delete it, before she could talk herself out of being honest. The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Darius was choosing his words carefully, and Audrey appreciated that. She did not want easy reassurance. She wanted truth. I don't know, but I think the fact that we're both asking means we want to try. And maybe that's enough to start with. Audrey read the message 3 times, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. Maybe that was enough. Maybe wanting to try was the only requirement, and everything else could be figured out along the way. She had spent so long needing certainty, needing to know the outcome before making the investment that she had forgotten how to take a risk on something that mattered. "I'd like to see you again," Audrey typed, "if that's something you want too." The response came quickly. "I do." Audrey felt a surge of something that might have been hope or might have been fear, but they felt remarkably similar. She thought about her calendar, the meetings and calls and obligations that filled every hour of every day. She thought about how easy it would be to suggest something weeks away, to give herself time to prepare, to build her defenses back up. But then she thought about Darius leaving the restaurant, about the way he had looked at her like she was someone worth remembering, and she made a different choice. Tomorrow night, same restaurant, 7 o'clock. She sent it before she could second-guess herself. Darius responded almost immediately. "I'll be there. And this time I won't stand you up." Audrey smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. She typed back quickly, "Neither will I." They said goodnight after that, and Audrey slipped her phone back into her pocket. She stood on the corner for another moment, watching the city move around her, feeling the strange new sensation of having something to look forward to that had nothing to do with work or success or proving herself to anyone. When she finally started walking toward home, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because anything had been solved or fixed, not because she knew how this would end, but because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had let someone see her and they had not looked away. The next morning, Audrey woke up and reached for her phone out of habit, expecting the usual flood of emails and messages, but the first thing she saw was a text from Darius sent early that morning while she was still asleep. "Good morning. I know it's early, but I wanted to say thank you again for last night. I forgot what it felt like to talk to someone who actually listens. See you tonight." Audrey stared at the message, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. She had been thanked for many things in her life, for closing deals, for making smart investments, for being ruthless when it mattered, but she had never been thanked for listening. She had not even known it was something worth thanking someone for. She typed back carefully, "Thank you for reminding me that I still know how. I'm looking forward to tonight." And she was. That was the surprising part. She was looking forward to something that had no agenda, no strategic value, no measurable outcome. She was looking forward to sitting across from Darius and continuing the conversation they had started, to seeing where it might go without trying to control the direction. The day passed in a blur of meetings and calls, but Audrey found her mind wandering in ways it usually did not. She caught herself thinking about what she would wear, how she would explain to her assistant why she was leaving early, whether Darius would bring pictures of Jalen or if that was too soon. She felt nervous in a way that was unfamiliar, the kind of nervousness that came from caring about something that mattered. When 7 o'clock came, Audrey walked into the same restaurant and saw Darius already sitting at a table, not off to the side this time, but in the center of the room. He stood when he saw her, and there was something different about him tonight. He looked less tired, more present, like he had given himself permission to be here fully. His deep brown skin seemed to relax into the soft lighting instead of resisting it, like for once he didn't feel like the odd one out in the room. "Hi," Darius said, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Hi," Audrey replied, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They sat down across from each other, and this time there was no pretense of waiting for someone else. This time they were here for each other. And that simple fact felt like the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted when they first sat alone in this restaurant, both stood up and both lonely. "So," Darius said, his eyes meeting hers with that same steady attention, "tell me something true." Audrey took a breath, feeling the weight of the question and the freedom of it at the same time. And then she started talking, and Darius listened, and in that moment everything else fell away. Not every meeting needs an ending. Sometimes the value of a night is simply reminding us that we still have the capacity to connect in a way that is kind and healthy and real. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up, be seen, and let someone else do the same.